I came home for Thanksgiving, but no one was there except my grandpa. My dad sent me a text message saying, "We spent your $7,000 on a family vacation. Have fun." Then my grandpa said, "Trust me, they won't like when I'm done." I just agreed. 5 days later, they were crying and begging. I flew back to Ohio from Denver on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. The weather was classic Midwest. Gray skies, half-melted snow on the runway, wind that would cut through your jacket no matter how expensive it was. I had been away at school since August, and between classes, working part-time and trying to stay afloat financially, I hadn't had time to think about much else. But the thought of Thanksgiving at home always made things better. Or it used to. My grandfather, Harold, was waiting at the airport with one of those ridiculous handwritten signs. It said, "Nathan, unpaid farmhand." I hadn't even touched my bag, and I was already smiling. That was Grandpa for you. Quiet most of the time. But when he spoke, it always landed. We didn't say much on the drive back. Just the usual small talk. He pointed out a dead deer on the side of the road and mumbled something about how people used to know how to drive in the snow. We pulled into the driveway. The house looked deserted. No lights, no decorations, no sign that a single pie had been thought of, let alone baked. I walked in, and it all hit me at once. No smell of turkey or cinnamon, no voices, no football game echoing from the living room, just silence and a strange emptiness, as if someone had packed up the spirit of Thanksgiving and shipped it off to a better family. I stood there confused, my suitcase still in my hand. Grandpa walked in behind me and sat down at the kitchen table like everything was fine. I checked my phone. A message from my father, sent 3 hours earlier. "We spent $7,000 on a family vacation. Have fun." There was a photo attached. The whole family. My mom, my dad, my younger sister, even the damn dog, posing in front of a beach resort. Matching Hawaiian shirts, sunglasses, cocktails in hand. The caption, "Maui 2025. I stared at the screen for maybe a minute. At first I thought it was a joke. But no, they actually left. They went on vacation without telling me during Thanksgiving. And not just any vacation. A $7,000 vacation. I showed Grandpa the note. He stared at it for a long time, his expression blank. Then he said calmly, "We'll show them where the crabs hibernate." I didn't even ask what that meant. I just nodded. I hadn't heard that phrase in years, but I knew what it meant. Something was coming. The next morning, Grandpa woke me early. He handed me coffee and a yellow legal pad and told me to start writing things down. Names, dates, accounts, everything I could remember about the money I'd saved over the summer. See, what I hadn't told him yet, but was about to, was that I'd saved up about $8,000 working 2 jobs over the summer. Most of it was cash. I kept it in my room hidden because I didn't trust online banks after what happened last year. I went upstairs and checked my room, and yeah, it was gone. That was the moment it stopped being a petty, messed up family move. That was when it became theft. I came back downstairs and gave Grandpa the list. He looked at it and said nothing, just nodded once. Then he picked up the house phone and made 3 calls. One to a guy named Benny, one to a lawyer he knew from a poker game, and one to his old friend Ed, who used to work for the sheriff's department. By dinner, he had a full plan. It involved legal pressure, family shame, and a few strategic leaks to certain people my dad definitely didn't want to know about. Grandpa wasn't angry. He was surgical. They thought they were just going on a nice vacation without the boring son and the old man. What they didn't know was that they had officially started a war. And in 5 days, they'd be crying on the porch, begging me to help them undo what Grandpa had started. But that part is yet to come. First, you have to know what happened the next morning. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Grandpa typing. And when I say typing, I mean a typewriter, not a laptop, not even a desktop. An actual World War II-looking machine that he dragged down from the attic as if he were preparing for Cold War espionage. He looked up, handed me a cup of instant coffee, and pointed to the table. There were folders on it, receipts, old financial records, tax forms, and, in the middle of it, my list, the one where I wrote down the $8,170 I had saved over the summer. He didn't say anything for a while, just kept typing. Eventually, he slid a sheet of paper across the table. It was a letter to my father. No emotion, just facts. It explained how I had saved the money, where it was kept, and how that exact amount had mysteriously disappeared just before the family left for Maui. No accusations, but no room for doubt. I didn't ask how he was so calm. I just watched him move, like a man who had waited years for something to matter again. He wasn't angry. He was energized. By noon, Grandpa had mailed certified copies of that letter to 3 people: my dad's employer, his accountant, who also did my uncle's taxes, and his country club. It wasn't even revenge yet, just warning shots. Then came the second wave. We went to the bank. Grandpa had me open a separate account in his name with me as a cosigner. It wasn't for protection. It was bait. He put in $100 just to make it official. Said we'd need it later. After that, we drove to a friend of his, a grizzled old guy named Kenny who ran a print shop out of a garage. Kenny made us a dozen fake save-the-date postcards for a fictitious 75th birthday party for Grandpa. The guest list? Everyone my mom liked to show off to. Neighbors, her Pilates friends, and worst of all, her church group. At this point, I didn't even know what the plan was. I was just following orders. That night, Grandpa cooked something strange with onions and canned fish, poured us both a glass of cheap whiskey, and sat down across from me. He said my dad used to steal quarters out of his ashtray when he was a teenager. He said it was always small at first, and no one noticed, but the habit never left him. Grandpa had let it go for decades. This wasn't just about money. It was about what happens when you think you'll never be held accountable. And then he said something that still echoes in my head. I didn't raise him to be that kind of man, but if he wants to act like one, we'll treat him like one. The next day, I posted the Maui family photo on Facebook with a caption that simply said, "Glad they're enjoying my tuition money." It was shared 27 times in an hour. At first, nothing. Then my phone lit up. Texts. Missed calls. One from my mom asking me to delete the post. Another from my dad saying I was overreacting. A voicemail from my sister that started with, "You really don't understand how hard they work," and ended with, "God, you're such a martyr." I ignored them all. 3 hours later, they finally called Grandpa. I sat next to him as the phone rang. He answered as if nothing was wrong. He just said, "Uh-huh, a lot," while they talked. Then, after a long pause, he looked at me, gave the slightest nod, and said, "You will return every dollar." Or, I pressed send. Then he hung up. I asked what send meant. He pointed to a folder on his desk labeled IRS contact sheet. I began to realize that Grandpa wasn't bluffing. And the best part? He still hadn't told them he knew they'd taken the money from my room. That part came next. The day after the phone call, things got weird fast. My dad tried to pretend it was all a misunderstanding. He sent an email titled Clarification, where he basically tried to make it sound like they thought I was not coming home and assumed the money was just some forgotten leftover from high school, which would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. I literally texted my mom 2 weeks ago about Thanksgiving plans. She even asked if I liked pumpkin or pecan pie. But sure, yeah, just a big misunderstanding. Grandpa didn't reply. He printed out the email, folded it in half, and put it in a red folder labeled Idiots. That same morning, Grandpa made a quiet visit to the county clerk's office and picked up a small claims form. Then we stopped by his lawyer's house. Yes, house. The guy works out of his converted basement and brews his own beer in the garage. His name is Arthur. He's in his 70s, and he smiled a little too broadly when Grandpa told him what had happened. Arthur wrote a formal demand letter. It listed the amount stolen, named my dad and mom, and politely suggested that if the full amount wasn't repaid within 3 business days, legal action would be taken, including fraud, theft, and trespassing on private property. That was the same day Grandpa found out how they got into my stash. Turns out my mom found the money during a deep clean of my room before I got back. The same deep clean where she put my high school baseball trophies up for sale on Facebook Marketplace. She texted this little tidbit to my aunt, thinking she was venting. My aunt screenshotted the message and sent it directly to me with the caption, "What the fuck is wrong with them?" That was the last thing Grandpa needed. He didn't yell. He didn't even look angry. He just walked over to the kitchen, pulled out a dusty cigar box from the top shelf, and opened it. Inside was an old ledger from when he ran a farm equipment business. Names, numbers, accounts. He turned to a blank page and started a new one. At the top, he wrote, "People who no longer exist." And below that, he added my father's name, then my mother's, then, after a moment's hesitation, my sister's. He closed the box. He said nothing more for the rest of the night. The next morning, he called his bank and cut off the monthly automatic payments he'd been sending to my parents' mortgage. Apparently, he'd been paying some of their bills for years, just never told anyone. Then he called his financial advisor and made another change, removing both of their names as beneficiaries. The advisor asked if he was sure. Grandpa said, "The kid's got more backbone than both of them combined. Give it all to him." That afternoon, a black SUV pulled into our driveway. It was them. My parents, back from Maui early. I watched them through the front window, looking tired, sunburned, and completely confused about how the power dynamic had shifted so much in 5 days. My father knocked on the door. Grandpa didn't even move. I opened it. They didn't even say hello. They just walked in, like they still owned the place. My mom looked around and asked where the dog was. He was at our neighbor's. Grandpa had thought ahead. Then they sat down all dramatic, and my dad looked at me and said, "We need to talk to your grandfather." Grandpa was sitting in his recliner, flipping through a Bass Pro catalog like nothing was happening. I told them he was listening. My dad started going on about how it was all a misunderstanding, that they panicked, that they didn't think it would blow up like this. Grandpa turned the page, didn't say a word. Then my mom did what she does best. She started crying, told Grandpa they made a mistake. They felt terrible, and she was about to call the police to report the money missing and say it must have been a burglary. That's when Grandpa finally spoke. "If you lie to the police about stealing from your own son, I'll give them your text messages myself." Silence. He stood up, walked to the desk, and handed my dad the letter from Arthur. My dad looked at it, went pale, then put it down, as if it might catch fire. Then Grandpa looked at them both and said something I'll never forget. "Return every cent." Or Nathan presses send. They didn't ask what send meant. They didn't have to. The envelope on the desk marked IRS said enough. I watched my father swallow whatever pride he had left. "Can we at least have a couple of days?" he asked. Grandpa nodded. "You have until Monday." And then he left the room. They begged me to talk to him. They said I was the only one who could get through to him. I said I'd think about it. I didn't. They left with their heads down and promises flying in every direction. They would fix it. They said they'd make it right. They talked to the bank first thing Monday. I said nothing. I just closed the door behind them and watched through the window as their SUV drove away, like criminals leaving the scene of their own intervention. Grandpa didn't say much the rest of the day. He grilled 2 steaks in the snow and gave me the bigger one without asking. We watched a rerun of Jeopardy, and he fell asleep in the recliner before the final round. I sat in the silence and thought about how quickly everything had changed. 5 days ago, I thought I was coming home to mashed potatoes and passive-aggressive jokes from my aunt. Now I was part of a family mutiny orchestrated by a man who didn't raise his voice but somehow still ran the house. Monday came. No money transfer. No apology. Just a text from my mom. It was a difficult weekend. Please give us some time. I showed it to Grandpa. He read it, nodded once, then slid the drawer open and pulled out the envelope marked IRS. Underneath it was another marked Sheriff's Department. He opened them both, placed them on the kitchen table, and handed me a pen. "I'm not doing this behind your back, but you say the word, and everything goes away." I asked him to wait another day. Not for her. For me, I wanted to see how far they'd take this. So I texted me dad. Grandpa has the letters. You have until noon tomorrow. No reply. Tuesday morning, I got up early. There was already movement downstairs. Grandpa was sitting at the table drinking coffee, the envelopes still untouched. I checked my phone. Nothing. At 11:50, the phone rang. It was my sister. I answered it, and all I heard was her sobbing. I waited. Finally, she handed the phone to my father. He said they didn't have the money. I asked what they had. He said they had about 3 grand. The rest was tied up in the resort bill, some tour packages, and a scooter accident my mom got into that apparently racked up 2 grand in fees. I honestly had no idea if he was lying or if they were really that stupid. I asked him again, "Did you take the money out of my room?" Silence. Then finally, yes. I went into the kitchen, picked up the 2 envelopes, and sat down across from Grandpa. Then I said, "Okay, send the first one." He didn't ask me if I was sure. The IRS envelope went out at 12:04. Certified mail? I texted my dad again. One down. At 2, they showed up unannounced. My mom was crying before they even knocked. My dad looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. They didn't ask to come in. They just stood on the porch like kids caught cheating on a test. Grandpa didn't move from his chair, but I opened the door. They were begging. Like, really begging. Said they didn't want to hurt me. Said it was a lapse in judgment. My mom tried to guilt Grandpa with a story about how hard she worked in her 20s to pay for his medicine. He said nothing. He just sat there and sipped his coffee. Then my dad said they were going to get the money. Every last cent. He asked Grandpa to cancel the IRS letter. Grandpa looked up and said, "Then pay Nathan back. In full. In cash. Today." They began to talk about bank limits and transfer delays. Grandpa held up a hand. No arguments. Just today. They left again. Less dramatically this time. At 6:43 p.m., my dad pulled into the driveway and handed me an envelope with $5,000 in cash. He said the rest would be there by Thursday. I took it, counted it, and closed the door. I gave the envelope to Grandpa. He took out $500, gave it back to me and said, "For your trouble." Then he lit a cigar on the porch and said, "We'll hold the second envelope for now." He never told me he had a second one, but I knew Thursday was coming. Thursday came with a strange calm. No phone calls, no texts, no SUVs pulling up like suburban gangsters. Just gray skies and the smell of snow coming in again. Grandpa made pancakes and added chocolate chips as if it were some kind of silent reward ceremony. We ate in the kitchen with the envelope still on the counter. Untouched, waiting. I didn't expect them to show up with the rest of the money. But I was wrong. At exactly 10:27, my dad texted, "We have the rest. Please let us in." Grandpa didn't look up from his crossword puzzle. I opened the door. There they were. My mom looking like she hadn't slept. My dad holding a plain white envelope, as if it were nuclear launch codes. They didn't speak. They just handed it over and waited. Inside was $3,170 in cash, to the dollar. No note, no apology. I didn't say thank you. I didn't say anything. I put it on the table next to the first envelope and looked at Grandpa. He looked at the total, nodded, and said, "Now they'll wait." My parents asked what he meant. He stood up and said, "You'll find out on Sunday." They left without a word. My mother looked back once as if to say something, but the door closed before she could. That night, Grandpa got a call from his financial advisor. I only caught part of the conversation, but it was about changing the will again. After he hung up, he handed me a folder. Inside was a document naming me as the sole beneficiary of everything. Savings, property, even the old truck out back that hadn't run since 2004. I told him I didn't need any of it. He said, "It's not about need." Then Sunday came. Grandpa dressed like he was going to church. Khakis tucked in. Shirt. Jacket with elbow patches. But we didn't go to church. We went to the community center in town. See those save the date cards we printed? He actually mailed them, told everyone he was having an early 75th birthday potluck. And everyone showed up. Neighbors, old poker buddies, even the pastor, and most importantly, my parents. They walked in like nothing was wrong, smiling, waving. My mom passed out cookies. My dad poured lemonade. It was all very weird, normal, and functional. Please forget everything. Until Grandpa walked up with a microphone. He thanked everyone for coming, made a few jokes about how getting old means getting loud about your will, and then casually announced that he'd recently updated all of his estate plans, effective immediately. He looked directly at my father. I left everything to the one person who didn't steal from me or lie to my face. Nathan, you could hear a fork hit the tile floor. My mother laughed as if he was joking. He wasn't. He handed me the microphone and walked away like it was karaoke night. I didn't give a speech. I just said, "Thank you." Then we served cake. My parents left early. No goodbyes. No hugs. But Grandpa and I, we stayed till the end. Played cards with the minister. Ate too much casserole. And on the way home, Grandpa said, "Revenge isn't loud. It's just lasting." I woke up the Monday after the party and thought maybe it was over, that we'd move on, that the silence would hold, that the storm had passed, but Grandpa wasn't done. By 9 a.m., he was already outside on a ladder in the cold, unscrewing the security camera my dad had installed last year. He didn't say anything when I came out with coffee, just kept working. Then he went around the house changing locks. Front door, garage, even the little basement lock that no one uses. When I asked him why he was doing all this now, he looked at me and said, "They lost access." That afternoon, he printed out a list of everything he still shared with my parents. Joint accounts, bills, any shared subscriptions, even the AAA roadside service. He canceled them one by one, calling customer service on speakerphone, using his full name, spelling it clearly, making sure they understood. Each call ended the same way. "Yes, I'm sure. Remove it." He called his bank and removed me from the co-signed student account. Not to punish me, but to open a new one in my name only. Then he moved his savings into that account. Every dollar. He said he was tired of watching other people misuse the things he'd worked his whole life for. Later that night, after dinner, he took an old fireproof box out of the hall closet. Inside was a thick folder with the words "Last Will and Testament" handwritten in faded ink. He tossed it into the fireplace and struck a match. "You don't reward rats with cheese," he said. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The following Friday, a card from my mother arrived in the mail. Store-bought. Generic. It said, "We miss you. Come home for Christmas. Let's start over." Inside was a picture of the tree being decorated. Our dog was wearing reindeer antlers. My sister was holding a tray of cookies. Everything about it screamed, "See? Nothing happened." Grandpa looked at it and handed it back to me. "Desperate people decorate early," he muttered. I didn't react to the card, but I did take a picture of the fireplace. No stockings, no ornaments, just the clean surface of the bricks and a fire burning low behind the grate. I posted it with the caption, "You can't decorate over betrayal." It got even more attention than the Thanksgiving post. 2 days later, there was a knock at the door. It was my dad. He wasn't wearing a jacket, even though it was below freezing. No car in sight, just him, looking more like someone who had just left a construction site than a man trying to feed his family. Grandpa opened the door halfway. My dad didn't say hello. He didn't ask to come in. He just said, "You won." Grandpa shook his head. This wasn't a game. Then he closed the door. The next morning, Grandpa made another phone call. Not to a lawyer. Not to a bank. To the county auditor. He asked what forms were needed to transfer a property title. Said he wanted to do it in person. No third party. 2 days later, we sat across from a tired woman in a government office while Grandpa signed the deed to the house over to me. He left the utilities in his name. But everything else, taxes, land, Future ownership was now mine. When we got home, he handed me the lawyer's folder again. This time, I noticed something new. A little note stapled to the front that said, "Trust is a stronger legacy than money." Winter came hard after that. The snow came early. Grandpa and I didn't do anything fancy for Christmas. No tree, no lights, just a roast chicken and some old war movies on DVD. We never heard from my parents again. Not directly. I saw a post from my mom on Facebook in January. It was a photo of her and my dad smiling at some fundraiser with the caption, "Some things are just too precious to give up." I didn't like it. I didn't comment. I just kept scrolling. A few months later, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, from my sister. She wanted to meet for coffee. Said she didn't agree with everything that happened, but she finally understood why. I haven't answered yet. Sometimes a clean break is the most merciful thing you can do. And Grandpa, he's still here, still quiet, still watching the neighborhood through the living room window, like a retired detective waiting for another case. But every now and then I catch him smiling when he sees me fixing something around the house, or paying bills on time, or just living with a little more backbone than I used to. They thought they could erase me with a vacation. Instead, they erased themselves. From the will, from the house, from history. You wanted to know where the crabs winter? Right here. In a warm house owned by someone who deserves it.